Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our look at the Napoleonic Wars through the lens of Epic History TV. I am very slowly recovering from whatever this nasty respiratory bug is that I have that I think sounds like seems to be going around. So if I sound a little under the weather, it's because I am. This is the longest I've been off the couch in 2 days. So if you haven't had a chance already to check it out, I did spend my day laying on the couch yesterday editing. Got up my latest video from the Ypres salient, the story of the men in Gate and the men who are remembered there. So I'll throw up a link at the end. If you want to check that out, I would greatly appreciate that. My friend JD over at the History Underground says that it's probably his favorite of all of my historic site videos he's ever done. So that's really high praise from the guy who I think is the best on YouTube at those types of videos. So thank you for that, JD. Let's go ahead and dive into the Battle of Borodino, 1812.
This Epic History TV video is brought to you by Magellan TV, the documentary streaming service.
I'm curious to know when he said that, because knowing that he's still got the battle at Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, which is going to be the largest battle pre-World War I in European history with like 500,000 men engaged. It's interesting to hear him say that, and I wonder when in his timeline he did.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history.
See, you have to think, if you're Russia in all of this, that you know that the weather is, like they talk about in sports, like in American football, they talk about the 12th man, right? Where, like having the crowd and using that as a part of your strategy. Russia has the weather and the terrain and the size of their nation. These are advantages that you use like weapons, and they're using them brilliantly.
September 1812. 10 weeks had passed since Napoleon invaded Russia with more than 500,000 men. The French Emperor wanted a quick victory over the Russians, one that would force Emperor Alexander to make peace and agree to French terms. But at Vitebsk and then Smolensk, the outnumbered Russian army had narrowly escaped his clutches. The holy city of Smolensk had been virtually destroyed. Napoleon had advanced deep into Russia, and months of marching had left his army decimated by disease and exhaustion. It was now half its original strength, and summer was nearly over. But finally, 70 miles west of Moscow, near the village of Borodino, the Russians had turned to offer battle. Napoleon would have a chance to win the decisive victory that he believed would end the war.
Because remember, a lot of people talk about Moscow being the end game, right? Number one, Moscow's not the capital. St. Petersburg is. Moscow's an important city, and it's a historically important city, but it's just territory, right? Napoleon was not trying to capture a city to end this war. He was trying to win a decisive battle on the battlefield that would bring Russia to negotiating terms. And he just wasn't able to get that because it kept pulling back.
The Russian army, commanded by the 67-year-old one-eyed veteran General Kutuzov.
Remember, he's been brought in specifically to confront Napoleon, right? They're bringing in somebody who has something to prove, and he wants to show that he can beat him on the battlefield because he was very embarrassed by his earlier performance against Napoleon at Austerlitz.
Occupied a defensive position across the two main roads leading from Smolensk to Moscow. General Barclay de Tolly's First Army was on the right, its front protected by the Kalatsha River, steep-banked but shallow and easily forded. Prince Bagration's Second Army was on the left, a more open position but reinforced by major earthworks, the Great Redoubt, and what the French nicknamed, for their shape, the Flèche, the arrows. Another forward redoubt at Borodino was expected to delay the enemy's advance. Historians still dispute the size of the Russian army, but it's likely Kutuzov had around 121,000 men and 680 guns at Borodino.
Let's just put this in perspective, right? Because when we're talking about, like, for an American audience, which I'm an American, most of the audience here is as well, the largest army that has ever been assembled in North America is right about that size. It's about 120,000. That was the Union Army at the Battle of Fredericksburg. And they didn't commit. Most of those men didn't even fight in that battle. The bloodiest battle in American history is the Battle of Gettysburg. And the Union Army had about 93,000 men. The Confederates had 70-some thousand. So 680 guns, though. I mean, Union Army in Fredericksburg had less than 300, maybe less than 200. These are huge, huge numbers.
On the 5th of September, Napoleon's army began to arrive from the west. Around 130,000 men and 585 guns. Napoleon quickly saw that the Borodino redoubt would have to be taken before he could deploy his army, and ordered an immediate assault. The attack was led by Compan's 5th Division of the 1st Corps, supported by the Polish 5th Corps to the south. In several hours of heavy fighting, the redoubt changed hands more than once. But late that evening, the Russians finally withdrew to their main line, and the redoubt fell to the French. Its capture had cost them an estimated 4,000 casualties, while the Russians lost around 6,000 men. Napoleon noted how few prisoners were taken, a worrying sign of the enemy's unbroken resolve.
Yeah, if you're facing an army that's the same size as yours, they're defending their home turf, they've got more guns than you, and they are not backing down, they're not surrendering, you're going to pay for this. Now I'm starting to get a sense of why Napoleon calls this his ugliest day.
Both sides spent the next day preparing for battle. Marshal Davout, commanding French First Corps and widely considered Napoleon's most able subordinate, appealed to the Emperor to use his corps to make a wide, outflanking attack to the south.
As I was looking at this map, that's literally what I thought. If I were playing a video game, that's what I would do. Forget trying to attack up here in the north where he's dug in behind this body of water here, this river. Go around this side and force him to come down and meet you.
But Napoleon dismissed the idea as too risky, and instead began preparing for a massive frontal assault on the Russian defenses. Shortly after dawn on the 7th of September, Orthodox priests paraded one of Russia's holiest icons, Our Lady of Smolensk, before the Russian army. It was a stirring sight for many devout Russian soldiers, thousands of whom would not live to see dusk.
What are you doing here? You're giving them bravery, you're giving them confidence, you're helping them to see that they're defending, that this is like a righteous cause. Have no fear. If you die, you die and go to heaven to be with God. And this is, you see this similar kind of thing happening in lots of different places. I think of July 2nd in Gettysburg, with Father William Corby giving general absolution to what's left of the Irish Brigade before they go into the wheat field, that kind of thing.
The battle began at 6 a.m. as French batteries opened a deafening cannonade against the Russian defences. Eugene's 4th Corps advanced on Borodino village, lightly held by Jaegers of the Russian Imperial Guard. After clearing the village, his infantry crossed the Kalacha and advanced towards the Great Redoubt, but were driven back with heavy losses. The Russians burned the bridge across the river, but did not launch a counterattack, and Eugene was able to move cannon into the village to put flanking fire on the Great Redoubt. In the centre, Davout's 1st Corps began its advance against the Fleches, coming under heavy fire. While on the right, the Polish 5th Corps, ordered to take Utitsa, got held up in the woods and ravines. Their slow advance allowed Tushkov's 3rd Corps to send a division north to reinforce the Fleches defences. Kutuzov, at his headquarters in Gorky, took little part in the battle, leaving tactical decisions to his subordinates. Barclay and Bagration had spent most of the summer arguing furiously over strategy, but in the hour of crisis, they put their differences aside.
That's important.
They could.
And so, what are the advantages of letting your subordinates handle things? Well, the advantages are they're there. They're on the ground. They know what's in front of them, and they're in the best position to know what's best to do. The disadvantage is, of course, that they don't know what else is going on. And so if you're just kind of allowing things to happen, it could be difficult if those people don't know what's happening in other places. Let's say their flanks both get turned, and now they're by themselves, and they don't know because you're leaving them to fight it on your own. Well, then they don't know that they need to pull back if you're not taking an active role in those things. But perfect example of why this is a good idea versus when it could be a bad idea. Battle of Chickamauga, 1863, September 1863. You have General Rosecrans coming in to a situation where he doesn't know what's going on, and he orders troops to be pulled out of the line and put somewhere else. And he creates a hole in the line to fill a hole that wasn't really there because he didn't have proper intelligence, he didn't know what was going on, and then that ends up costing him the battle. So there are positives and negatives to kind of having this hands-off approach like this.
See, the main French attack was falling on the Russian centre and left. So Barclay ordered General Bagavout's 2nd Corps south to reinforce Bagration.
It's a long way to go.
Fighting around the Fleches intensified as the French captured one of the earthworks, only to be driven out by a Russian counterattack. Davout himself was injured in the fighting as he fell from his dying horse, but he refused to leave the field. When Russian cavalry counterattacked, Marshal Murat himself led the French cavalry forward to meet them. Ney's 3rd Corps now joined the attack on the Fleches. A charge by Russian cuirassiers forced Murat to take shelter in a square of Württemberg infantry. Murat, with his flamboyant dress and reckless courage, had now even made a name for himself among the Russians. The Cossacks in particular saw him as a kindred spirit, and were eager to capture him alive if they could. To the south, Polish troops now took Utitsa, which the Russians set ablaze before withdrawing.
Scorched earth.
But General Bagavout's reinforcements arrived just in time to shore up the Russian flank. Around 10 a.m, Eugene launched another attack on the Great Redoubt. It was briefly captured by Moran's 1st Division, before his men were thrown out by a ferocious Russian counterattack. The Russian army's 27-year-old artillery commander, General Kutuzov, was killed leading one of these counterattacks. A heroic death, but a blow to the organization of Russian artillery for the rest of the day. Fighting continued to rage around the Flèche earthworks. Some counted as many as 6 major French assaults, involving 45,000 troops, with hundreds of cannon on both sides, pouring fire into the packed ranks.
Just put yourself in the position of a soldier on the ground. I know we're talking about Napoleon, we're talking about generals and armies and troop movements, but being on the ground in a spot, I think I just came from the Antietam battlefield a couple months ago, where you had the cornfield, where you had dozens of artillery pieces firing into this couple of acres, and you had 4 or 5 counterattacks that happened involving tens of thousands of men. This is way bigger scale than that, and we're talking hundreds of artillery pieces. How did anything live on that field, and how were you ever the same after experiencing that if you did?
More than once, French infantry fought their way into one of the Russian positions, only to be driven out again at bayonet point.
Wow.
Junot's Westphalian Corps was sent forward in support, helping to clear Russian skirmishers from the woods to the south. General Bagration was close to the action, overseeing the defense of the Flèche, leading forward reinforcements and ordering counterattacks. Around 10 a.m, he was hit in the leg by shell fragments. Mortally wounded, he was carried from the field.
This is getting ugly.
Shaken by the loss of their iconic commander.
That's 2 significant Russian generals down now, right? Their artillery commander and now Bagration. This is bad. This is bad for everybody involved.
The exhausted Russian infantry began to fall back. The French finally took the Flèche. Marshal Murat then led forward Friant's division, 1st Corps' last reserve, supported by waves of heavy cavalry on both flanks. Russian grenadiers formed squares to ward off the French cuirassiers, while their own guard cavalry fought the French in a giant confused melee, with heavy losses on both sides. The Russians resisted doggedly, but the combined onslaught of French artillery, cavalry, and infantry proved irresistible. As the Russians pulled back, Friant's infantry fought their way into the village of Semyenovskaya. The Russian center was in disarray and seemed close to breaking. Surely now was the time for Napoleon to deliver the knockout blow.
But even now, I'm thinking ahead, though. I mean, okay, so you win this battle. You win this huge battle against 120,000 men. You're probably taking tens of thousands of casualties easy. You've already lost half your army at this point. It's getting close to where you're going to be dealing with winter. You're in hundreds of miles deep into enemy territory. What does a win look like at this point? I mean, how does winning this battle really benefit you, unless you think they're going to surrender, but they're not.
For most of the day, Napoleon remained at his headquarters near Borodino. Those around him later said that illness, as well as the exertions of the long campaign, had left him tired and irritable. As the Russian center buckled, Murat and his staff urged him to send forward his last reserve, the Imperial Guard. The Emperor refused. If there is another battle tomorrow, he asked them, where is my army? But he did make one exception. Barclay was continuing to move troops from his unengaged right wing to bolster the center. As Osterman Tolstoy's 4th Corps arrived behind the Russian center, French observers feared they were massing for an attack. So Napoleon ordered forward General Sorbier's Guard artillery. His batteries opened a devastating fire on the enemy. Yet even as they were mown down in their ranks, the Russian infantry stood their ground. On the Russian right wing, all remained quiet, so General Platov, commander of the Don Cossacks, proposed that he lead an attack on the lightly defended Borodino village. Permission received, Generals Platov and Uvarov led a force of 8,000 Cossacks and cavalry across the Kalacha River. They fell on French and Italian troops around Borodino with complete surprise, spreading panic and disorder. Grouchy's 3rd Cavalry Corps had to be pulled back across the river to drive off the Russians. Russian commanders saw this raid as a missed opportunity, but it had delayed the next French attack by 2 hours, and may have persuaded Napoleon that he was right to hold back his reserve.
Wounded for the 22nd time at Borodino. This is his aide-de-camp, so this is a guy that's around Napoleon a lot, and he's probably around other high-ranking officers. Wounded for the 22nd time shows you just how intense the fighting has been, and it makes it a small miracle Napoleon's never been hit in all this.
Around 3 p.m., the French launched their biggest assault yet on the Great Redoubt. Russian gunners targeted the French infantry advancing to their front, allowing French cavalry to outflank the redoubt and charge it from the rear. Saxon cavalry were first in, cutting down Russian infantry and gunners almost to the last man. It was an astonishing feat by the horsemen, against all the rules of war, and testament to the ferocity of the fighting. As Eugene's infantry consolidated their hold on the redoubt, he ordered forward all the available cavalry to exploit this success. But they were met and checked by the last Russian cavalry reserves.
Everybody's throwing their last reserves in.
Eugene now implored Napoleon to commit the Imperial Guard. But again, the Emperor refused. "I will not destroy my guard," he told his staff. "I am 800 leagues from France, and I will not risk my last reserve."
Translation, I need somebody to protect me when I get out of here. Let's remember, Napoleon does have a history of that, all the way back to Egypt, right? He's losing in Egypt, he basically abandons the army there, and he's going to have to do the same thing here.
By 5 p.m., both armies were in a state of utter exhaustion. The battlefield was strewn with dead and wounded. Some infantry battalions could muster only a third of their strength. Cavalry could advance no faster than a trot. Gun crews were collapsing with fatigue. As dusk approached, fighting slowly died out across the battlefield. Napoleon and the French army expected the fighting to resume the next day. But by dawn, Kutuzov, having learned the full, horrifying scale of Russian losses, had ordered a withdrawal.
This artwork's fantastic, by the way. I know I've said that before, but it really immerses you in what's happening here and gives you a sense of the scale and the horror of all this. It's really well done.
The losses on both sides were enormous.
Oh, here we go.
Russian casualties are estimated at 44,000. French losses around 30,000.
The French were attacking a defensive position that was strongly fortified by the Russians, and yet took fewer casualties. That's impressive, but still, we were talking about, what, 250,000 men between the two armies, and we're looking at 75,000 casualties. That's, again, perspective. Gettysburg, 51,000 casualties, the bloodiest battle on American soil in history in 3 days. This is a shorter battle with more casualties. just makes me want to study this war more. And I know I was doing some research the last couple of days trying to find what Napoleonic War battlefields are largely untouched. In other words, you can go there and they still maybe look a little like they did back then. And Borodino is one of those places. Now, I don't think I'm going to be hauling off to Russia anytime soon, but if things calm down over there a little bit, that's the kind of place I think I'd like to go.
Including 49 generals, 12 of them killed.
Wow.
Borodino would prove to be the bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars.
One day. The bloodiest single day in American history on both sides total is Antietam, right? And we're talking like a third, less than a third this many casualties.
The Russian army could not fight another battle until it had received major reinforcements. And so Kutuzov decided that he must abandon Moscow. On the 15th of September, a week after his victory at Borodino, Napoleon entered the city. He would find it virtually deserted, and already the first fires starting to burn.
And that is taking scorched earth tactics to another level, when you're willing to burn one of your most historic cities to deny it to the enemy. That is some serious scorched earth tactic. That is some serious dedication to a tactic. So, all right. Excuse me. I'm hanging on as best as I can here, guys, but we're going to wrap it up right there. I'm going to throw up the link to the video about the Menin Gate that went live yesterday. Please check that out. Even if you've never checked out my original content, my historic site videos before, give it a chance. See what you think. Let me know in the comment section. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.